Great. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Max Goldman with the American Academy of Neurology, and I appreciate you coming to the AAN and SfN Joint Forum on Neuroscience Research in Times of Uncertainty. Before we get started with the panel, I wanted to go over some quick guidelines. For all of you attendees, for audio, all lines have been muted, just so we can ensure we hear all the panelists. Video has also been disabled for attendees in order to maximize bandwidth and ensure we have no problems with the Zoom crashing. If you have any technical problems, please use the chat button and you can message staff. We'll try and help you out as best we can. And for content questions, you can go through the Q&A function or through the chat. We'll be looking through and passing things off to our panelists when we get to the Q&A portion of the event. And before we get started, just wanted to quickly introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Natalia Rost, the president of the American Academy of Neurology and chief of the stroke division at Mass General Hospital, Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. John Morrison, the president of the Society for Neuroscience and professor of neurology and neuroscience at UC Davis in Davis, California. Dr. Paul George, the chair of the AAN Science Committee and faculty in the Department of Neurology and Neurological Sciences at Stanford University, Stanford, California. Dr. Diane Lipscomb, the chair of the Government and Public Affairs Committee, the Society for Neuroscience, and the director of the Carney Institute for Brain Science at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And finally, Dr. Justin Jordan, the vice chair of the AAN's Advocacy Committee and section head of the Neuro-Oncology Division at UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas. With that, I'll pass it off to Dr. Rost to get us started.
Thank you, Max. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the American Academy of Neurology, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's forum, co-hosted with our colleagues at the Society for Neuroscience. At the AAN, we represent more than 40,000 neurologists and neuroscience professionals in more than 140 countries around the world, and we're united by our mission to enhance member career fulfillment and promote brain health for all. This mission drives everything we do at the Academy. And as we focus on science and advocacy today, it is important to understand that these are the cornerstones of what we do and how we do it to make a positive difference in lives of our patients, their families, and the public. Advocacy is firmly woven into our DNA here at the Academy. We were founded in 1948 to be a home for all neurologists and to advocate for the needs of a profession that was growing out of the universities and into the clinics. And scientific research was the engine propelling the field of neurology toward the inevitable cures. And one of our earliest advocates and former AAN president, Dr. Pierce Bailey, understood that to ensure the future of neurology, the AAN needed to bring the spirit of advocacy to Washington, D.C. to promote neuroscience research. And in 1950, Dr. Bailey did just that. By bringing the AAN's founder, A.B. Baker, to D.C., they were able to convince Congress of the need to establish a new institute at the NIH, the National Institute of Neurological Disease and Blindness, the NINDB, which later became NINDS in 1968. And actually, Dr. Bailey was eventually appointed as the Institute's first director, and the rest, as they say, is history. But now, as we look back at the past 75 years of the NINDS success, what strikes me is the tremendous potential of our coordinated advocacy efforts and how Dr. Bailey's one idea in 1950 set into motion the events that would transform the course of history and inspire hope for the millions of our patients with neurological disorders. Just like this story inspires me to think that the joint efforts of our two organizations today also can bring about a powerful transformation as we come notably to another inflection point in the history of our profession and of neuroscience. This is not just about protecting our funding for our grants in the upcoming fiscal years, but protecting the next generation of cures for the patients we serve and advancing the future of brain health for all. Today's forum reflects this commitment, and as a clinician scientist myself, I appreciate that science is at the foundation of everything we do in clinic today. Make no mistake, from diagnosis to treatment, from prevention to prognosis. And we know that federal research funding is the lifeblood of scientific discovery. And yet, as many of us know, the process that determines this funding is often complex, unpredictable, and at times deeply challenging. So today we will explore not only why federal funding matters, but how we can engage meaningfully and effectively to protect and advance it. So thank you for being here today, for your commitment to science and patient care, and for lending your voice to the future of neuroscience. And your voice matters. And by joining our voices together today, we grow stronger. So now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. John Morrison, the president of the Society for Neuroscience, to provide some additional opening remarks. John?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Roast. I'd like to join Dr. Roast in welcoming all of you to the first joint forum sponsored by the American Academy of Neurology and the Society for Neuroscience. SFN was founded in 1969 as a mechanism to reinforce and promote the new basic science field of neuroscience. The founders purposely made it singular rather than the plural neurosciences to emphasize that it was not a collection of already identified biomedical disciplines, but rather a new discipline with its own scientific identity, biological principles, and body of knowledge to be mastered and taught. In the 55 years since its founding, SFN has played a key role in the promotion of neuroscience and in providing a home for the practitioners of this new scientific discipline. As PhD programs and postdoctoral opportunities in neuroscience grew in leaps and bounds, membership in SFN grew along with it, and the annual meeting grew from a few hundred attendees in 1969 to over 30,000 from all over the world. Given that we have the great honor and opportunity to push forward the understanding of the brain, an organ that humans are particularly proud of and concerned about, we've always found the American people and the federal government to be a willing partner in funding this great adventure. As neuroscience has matured as a field, SFN members have become more and more translational in their efforts, such that the meeting now features major breakthroughs of direct relevance to brain health and disease, reinforcing the importance of our partnership with organizations such as AAN. This is particularly important in our advocacy efforts, where a focus on brain disorders and the basic science underpinnings of clinical innovation are very compelling to our audience. Advocacy for neuroscience and neurology is more important than ever, since we find ourselves in the most challenging era that has existed since the immediate post-World War II era, when FDR and his top science advisor, Vannevar Bush, laid out a peacetime plan for a relationship between federal funding and basic science centered at our great universities. Bush said the federal government will fund the science, you do the research, and train the next generation of scientists. And we said, okay, it's a deal. This relationship led to enormous scientific progress, medical breakthroughs, improved quality of life, and economic prosperity for the next 70 years. It's been the envy of Europe and Asia as they move their scientific efforts forward as well. And this relationship now between the federal government, universities, and medical centers is under severe strain, to say the least. And this comes at a time of unprecedented opportunity for the basic neuroscience to be translated into clinical innovations that can address some of the most devastating diseases that humans everywhere face. I'm confident that the American people will continue to be our partners in this effort, but we need to educate them regarding both the opportunities currently at hand and the risks to both present and future medical progress if we continue on the current course of action by the federal government. We will be more effective if we do this together, and we hope to launch such a joint effort today. I'd like to now move to the next topic, why federal funding matters. Well, as members of the brain health and research community, we know that federal funding is the lifeblood of all biomedical research. Most of us throughout our careers are supported either directly or indirectly by these dollars. This year's federal agency communication and funding freezes, workforce layoffs, instability and breakdown of order and processes, and the current government shutdown have left the neuroscience community deeply concerned about whether its vital work will continue. Researchers count on reliable funding to plan long-term studies, develop technologies, and engage in groundbreaking science without disruption. We've seen firsthand that the stability and sustained progress of the biomedical community doesn't happen automatically. It depends on policymakers understanding the value of what we do and why it matters. That's why we need Congress to protect congressionally approved funding for biomedical research and the scientific workforce, and avoid further government shutdowns that have devastating impacts on biomedical research efforts and discoveries. This critical role of federal funding for biomedical research cannot be overstated. For trainees, this funding is your present and your future. It pays for training grants, fellowships, salaries, support of infrastructure, and allows labs to function with stability and necessary resources. There's also the real-world economic impact. Every grant fuels an entire ecosystem, not just the PIs, but students, postdocs, research staff, and the communities around universities and hospitals. Federal investment is also the key reason why the US is a global leader in neuroscience, and it must remain so. Virtually all drugs developed in recent decades relied on NIH-funded basic science. NIH's BRAIN initiative is a key example of the high impact of federal research dollars. For more than a decade, the BRAIN initiative has revolutionized our understanding of the brain by accelerating the development and application of innovative neurotechnologies for both animal models and the human brain, such as a comprehensive neural map of an adult fruit fly brain and cell type atlases with molecular signatures of both the mouse and human brain. Technologies developed through the BRAIN initiative are accelerating progress in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, and many other brain conditions and diseases. We tend to think that what we know and discuss in our internal scientific community is apparent to others, but that is not the case. We need to be actively involved in educating the public and policymakers. Policymakers are not experts in every area, and certainly not in neuroscience. They need to hear your stories, the work you're doing, why federal support matters, and what could be lost without it. Next, we'll hear how to do exactly that, how the appropriations process works, and where your voice fits in. And I will now hand it off to Dr. George to cover these issues from the AAN perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Morrison, and you and Dr. Roast have already laid out many reasons why federal funding is so critical and important. I think, as you mentioned, there's really not a treatment that touches patients that hasn't been affected by federal funding, and the basis for understanding how the brain works and what goes wrong when there is disease is really laid out by federal funding and the ability to do research in those disorders. And often these discoveries are nonlinear. So the stability of research funding is really critical that the federal government provides to attack these really complex problems of the brain and nervous system. I think without the sustained support of these research programs that the federal government provides, we couldn't answer these questions and treat our patients and advance the treatment of our patients. I'd like to just quickly go through one example of this because I think it illustrates the point as to how TPA came to treat stroke patients. And, you know, this drug discovery was 150 years in the making. It first started back in the 1800s when it was discovered that the main component of a thrombus is fibrin and not just the blood cells in our blood system. Fast forward to 100 years from then, and there's a fibrinolytic compound was found from hemolytic strep in a culture system. In the 1950s, plasminogen activator was isolated from pig hearts. And separately, hamster ovary cell cultures were first established to start to produce human recombinant proteins. 30 years later, in the 1980s, it was found that human tissue plasminogen activating factor for melanoma cells could thrombolyse pulmonary emboli in rabbit lungs. And soon after this, tissue type plasminogen activator cDNA was first expressed in E. coli. And it wasn't until later in the 80s when industry first touched this and started producing TPA from these ovary cell cultures for acute MI. And later, in federally funded clinical trials, TPA was used in acute stroke. And so you can see these discoveries take literally centuries sometimes to progress from first discovery to humans. And so that's really a main reason why research funding is so important from the federal government. Just to build upon Dr. Morrison's point about federal funding allowing the U.S. to be the leader in biomedical research. For every $1 of federal funding, around $3 in the economy are produced. And so it really is a driver for our economy and critical for that biotechnology enterprise. And finally, it's also essential for careers in research. Without the substantial funding from federal sources, we may lose researchers, and the brightest minds may decide not to go into neuroscience research because of the instability and pursue other paths. And this would amount to treatment losses for our patients, and we would lose the ability to treat patients and understand how our brain and the body works. So I think all these really point to the necessity for federal funding of research. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Diane Lipscomb from the Society of Neuroscience, just to discuss how we can advocate for this critical support and get into the process.
Thank you, Dr. George. And I'm going to move from hearing the critical importance of, steady, predictable funding for research to the actual appropriations process. And that's going to be the topic that I'll cover in the next few minutes. So to start with, it's really critically important to understand that there's a way in which the process should work, and then there's the way in which it actually works. And those two things aren't the same. And that's especially true in recent years. And so I'm going to talk about in the perfect world, how should the process work in order to appropriate funding for research and indeed the whole budget. And this starts with, initiated in about February of the year in order to have a signed, sealed, and delivered budget for the start of the fiscal year, which starts on October 1st. So to begin with, federal agencies propose budgets, and the White House releases a comprehensive budget request, and that is a non-binding request. And then from there, Congress, the House, the Senate are supposed to pass a budget resolution, and this non-binding measure sets overall spending and revenue levels for the year, giving appropriations committees their spending caps. From there, the House and the Senate appropriations committees divide the total spending caps among their 12 subcommittees, which each have jurisdiction over different federal departments, agencies, and programs. For example, the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education, or the LHHS-ED subcommittee works on that bill that funds the NIH. Similarly, the Commerce, Justice, and Science, or the CJS subcommittee works on the bill that funds NSF. Each subcommittee drafts its own individual appropriation bills, decides how to distribute the funding, and then they hold hearings considering amendments, markups, and approve the bill. These bills are then debated, voted on by the full appropriations committee, followed by the full chamber, either the House or the Senate. And ideally, both the House and Senate would have approved an appropriations bill. Then conference committees would reconcile differences between the two chambers' versions of the bill. The final bills are voted on in each chamber and then sent to the president to be signed into law before the beginning of, ideally, before the beginning of the new fiscal year, which starts October 1. And, we know where we are today, and it's no exaggeration to say that this never happens. In reality, the process is typically delayed and often very unpredictable. Congress has only passed all appropriation bills by the deadline a handful of times since the current system was established in 1974. So each fiscal year, there are a lot of deviations from the process, and it includes delayed president's budget requests, delayed markups, lack of consensus between the House and the Senate bills, continuing resolutions, which you've probably mainly heard of as the CRs, which extend funding at current levels to buy Congress time for additional negotiations before the deadlines and last-minute deals. And of course, as I said, there was not a deal by September 30th, which is the end of the last fiscal year, and we have been in a government shutdown then. As advocates, this process is important to know because there are certain stages of the process where your voices are really best heard. And so it's really critically important to know the different parts of the whole process in order to know when to insert your voice and your voices to get your views across during the budget process. So I'm going to now hand off to Dr. Jordan, who's going to cover points of influence, current state of play, and animals in research. So Dr. Jordan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lipscomb, for laying out how appropriations should work There are several opportunities for advocates like yourselves to influence the process along the way. So first, you can submit appropriations requests to any office in support of funding levels for programs that are important to neuroscience research. And this helps members of Congress prioritize the requests from their constituents to the Appropriations Committee, and is important in showing broad support for our issues. When the request window closes, organizations like ours can also provide letters or statements for the record or subcommittee and committee markups. This is another important opportunity to publicly advocate for your priorities. Finally, when you continue to influence appropriation bills, you can continue to influence appropriation bills as congressional leadership works to reconcile differences between the House and Senate versions of each bill. This usually takes place in early fall, but can go as long as the end of the year. So where did this process get us this year? Well, FY 2025 funding was not agreed to until March of 2025, several months after the fiscal year actually began in October of 24. So this, therefore, delayed the kickoff for 2026 requests and negotiations. The process was further delayed by reconciliation negotiations, which became really the main focus of congressional work after FY 25 fundings were signed into law. The main interest for our organizations, the appropriations bills compiled by the House and the Senate Labor H subcommittees, weren't even scheduled for subcommittee markup until late July in the Senate and early September in the House. So for neuroscience research and the shared priorities of our organizations, the bills were really a mixed bag. The Senate Labor H bill came out, all things considered, the better of the two options for our organizations. The top line NIH numbers in the Senate bill appropriated $48.7 billion, as well as $9 billion for the NSF. And that represents a $400 million increase over the approved FY 2025 funding levels for NIH, and a $60 million decrease for the NSF. While neuroscience research takes place across several institutes, it's notable to see an increase in the budget for the National Institute of Neurologic Disease and Stroke, which was appropriated at $2.7 billion in the Senate. That's an increase over $100 million. So again, while these are not the increased numbers we were hoping for, it was encouraging to see any increase at all in neuroscience research funding in this bill. The House bill, which was passed out of committee in September, also included an increase for NIH, appropriating $46.9 billion. And the NSF was appropriated by $7 billion by the House. Together, this represents a $99 million increase in funding for NIH and a significant cut of $2 billion to the NSF, which underscores the importance of continued and sustained advocacy on multiple fronts. While a $99 million increase is far short of what the research community was asking for, it was worth looking at what was appropriated for NINDS to show the relative value being placed on neuroscience. The House funding NINDS at $2.633 billion represented a $30 million increase. Again, $30 million increase, certainly short of what we need to continue moving the needle forward on neuroscience research, but it represented nearly a third of the entire increase at the NIH. So where does this put us now? Certainly, this is not a funding win, but it does show the importance and the power of advocacy. So groups like ours and the coalitions that we work with were heard, and that led to some increases to continue supporting the work that we've done on behalf of patients with neurological conditions. Some, but certainly not all, of the key coalitions that SfN is an active member of include Research America, the National Association for Biomedical Research, and the Coalition for Life Sciences, Americans for Medical Progress, the Coalition for National Science Funding, and many more. And I'm also happy to note that there's overlap with SfN and the AAN with regard to coalition membership and activity. Even with these small wins, such as they are, there's still a lot of work to do to remedy issues in both bills before FY 2026. Neither bill included language protecting animal research at the NIH. So while the NIH and HHS leadership are looking to shift away from animal research, we need to ensure that this vital preclinical research is happening in the neuroscience space and is continued to be allowed. Any shift away from funding the animal models, and especially non-human primate research at the NIH, will negatively impact our field, and we'll need to continue educating members of Congress about the importance of this work. We also saw both chambers of Congress fail to meet increased funding needs for the BRAIN initiative. This program, which funds basic science research into the human brain, is essential to developing the next generation of treatments and cures for patients with neurologic conditions. FY 2026 is the last year in which the program will receive mandatory funding through the Cures Initiative. Congress often boosts discretionary funding through the NIH budget to meet the need for continued research in this space, but both chambers did not provide any increased funding levels at this time. As you all know, the need for continued funding is there. In FY 2025, the BRAIN initiative could only fund 50% of proposals, and in FY 2026, due to continued decreases in funding, it could only fund 20% of proposals. Both of these are far from perfect, and we need to continue reaching out to our members of Congress to underscore the importance for full and robust funding for neuroscience research at both the NIH and NSF. Congress has yet to approve funding for FY 2026, which has led to the current government shutdown. As our organizations push for Congress to come to a short-term agreement and end the government shutdown, we continue to have opportunities to push appropriators and congressional leadership to make changes to the labor H bills before funding levels are set in a funding package. So I'd like to hand it back to Dr. Lipscomb to talk through some of the best ways that you can make a difference at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. This is a fun part. So I'm going to go through a number of different points, but first of all, get involved in your professional societies. Obviously, this is a kind of an easy step in order to begin to understand how you advocate for funding for research. They, SfN and AAN, have a great team, incredible staff, and also the tools that you're going to need in order to be a confident, well-informed advocate for neuroscience research. Our advocacy teams are leaders and work in coalition, as has already been mentioned, and incredibly important that societies work together. And they work collectively in a variety of different advocacy activities, including congressional briefings, coalition meetings, joint meetings with community partners, helping to develop really powerful letters to Congress, making statements, action alerts, newsletters, and providing informational materials to advocates like you. Number two, you really do need to participate in your organization's grassroots effort. This is incredibly important. If you think you should be doing something, do something. Don't just wait till tomorrow. Respond to the action alerts that get pushed out to you by email, a variety of different mechanisms. And when your society or organization asks you to take action because this is really the most important step, first step that you'll take. It's a chance to share your personal story about the impact of federal policies and research dollars. I'll come back to personalizing, the importance of personalizing in advocacy in a second. So we really encourage you to include and start to think about what is your story, what's your customized story. Use local data from your state, from your city. Start to develop a narrative that tells other people about what is happening to you in your city, in your state, so that you can link with people that you're advocating, trying to advocate for additional research. Become a person. Number three, if you're invited to your organization's Capitol Hill Day, in person or virtual, be there if you can. These events are really, really important. We've all seen how these things work. It's a way to connect. And if you're not there, other groups are there, and other groups will be heard, and we won't be heard. Critically important to really participate in those. It serves as an inroad. You start to build new relationships with your congressional offices. They want to know you, especially if you're from their state. They really, or their district. They really want to know who you are, and you can make that very personal connection. Get to know the staff that you meet during the events. The staffers within the offices are fantastic, incredibly smart, and really dedicated. Take business cards, follow up by email, social media, start dialogue with them. You want them to recognize you, and to recognize your story when you reach out again. Number 4, you don't have to be in Washington, D.C. to be heard. Find opportunities to connect with your legislators and their teams back home. And I guess I'll reiterate some of the things that I just mentioned, but you can schedule in-person meetings in the district and state offices of your home. They're expecting that. Other groups do that. You should do that. You can initiate it, and you can pull together your colleagues in wherever you are. Invite lawmakers to see your lab, the facilities, or your institution. I've done this, and it's really exciting. I mean, it's great. There's no better way to turn your science into something that others can see and possibly touch, but to understand and get into what it is we do as scientists. You break down those barriers and you break down the walls when you can communicate with people in the place where you're doing your research. These are incredibly powerful opportunities, and they make for great photo opportunities. You should look for your legislator's public calendar, and so there's an easy way to know whether your legislator's in the state in person, and that's a good way to figure out, well, could I actually invite them to my lab? So you can get a little bit more information about timing. Are there town halls that you could go to? Can you participate in community events? Show up and share your concerns and share your story. I've just got 2 more points to make. Number 5, it is incredibly important. We had questions about this. Advocacy is not partisan. No matter who your legislator is, you want to make them understand the importance of funding or policies that you're advocating for. And if your legislator is from a party that doesn't typically support your cause, it's your job to make a compelling case for your issues with the facts to back it up. So be data-driven. And in fact, you should seek out people who don't agree with you. It's easy to go into a group of people who you know are going to agree with you. You're really not making a strong case there because you're among those individuals who have the same thought as you. Go find those legislators that you think, I don't think they're going to agree with me, and make the case really compelling and be very much a person. Tell a personal story, dig very deep and tell your story and how important your work is to you. Finally, and this is true in all walks of life, be patient and be persistent. Don't take things personally. People are busy. Just remember that the people who show up consistently, and I think you're going to be those people, you're going to be the ones that are going to shape the conversation. So be polite, be persistent, and be patient. Thank you. And I think now this is going to go to Dr. Roast and to Morrison.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great.
Dr. Lipscomb. Thank you, Dr. Jordan. Thank you, Dr. George. It is my privilege working with Dr. Morrison right now to actually moderate our Q&A, which we fortunately have quite a bit of time for. I know we've received dozens and dozens of questions in preparation for this webinar, and we're very excited about all of them. I'll perhaps kick off with this question for Dr. George. I know that there's been a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, I would say, concern in the recent months, and we're thinking about the impact of the government shutdown on research as it is right now. But How can you help us understand what is the long-term consequences of government shutdown on neuroscience research?
It's a great question, right? What does 1 month of not getting funding, how does that affect long-term things? I think, but it goes to the instability of the research enterprise. As we talked about earlier, a lot of the labs, the postdocs, the staff, the infrastructure of the clinical trials is all built upon having sustained funding from federal resources. And if you can't count on that, it starts to break down. And so I think even these shorter term periods where we don't have regular funding can start to have big impacts on groups. You might have to reduce the size of a group and let people go. And then it takes, it's hard to build that back up. I think the other big impact is just if someone's starting a career in science or research, and they start to see all this instability and the regular methods that have been agreed upon for years in this country aren't regular anymore, we may lose that generation of scientists and that ability to make these advances and then turn those into treatments for our patients. And that's a critical fear if this instability continues.
Just wanted to also remind our audience to keep sending us live questions. We have some we received in advance of the webinar, but feel free to send us new questions. Dr. Morrison, off to you.
Yep. So I noticed that there's over 220 people on the webinar. How can each of them be effective advocates for basic and clinical research? Diane, you covered some of this. Maybe you want to launch the panel on this.
Well, I think it would be a big victory if we added over 200 people to the advocacy team.
Yeah, exactly.
let's be our goal. That would be one way of increasing the efficacy of advocacy. I mentioned it a little bit. I would, underscore, I think, a couple of things, and then others I'm sure will jump in. I think it is important to just take all opportunities, no matter, in what situation, to not to be the boring person in the room, but to just really explain what it is you do. I think a lot of people I've found in all the spheres of the social things that I'm involved in, particularly non-scientists, are really, really, really interested in what we do. And if you can explain to someone, not be patronizing, just meet them where they are, and explain how important it is that we continue to build knowledge and we continue to discover things. And I think Dr. George's example was fantastic of TPA, but have those examples in your pocket that people can really, really, really understand, because we often get caught in our own world and try to explain more complex things, but you can really stand back and have the ability and hone the ability to be able to describe things so that the information is accessible to a broader range of individuals. That means, as I said before, meeting people where they are, not where you are, but where they are. And it really, of course, it's about you because we're advocates, but it really is about the person that you're talking to. And your goal and your mission is to get across the important information about why they should care. Make it personal. I said that before, but we are people. We are social animals. And it is really important to really connect with someone on a very personal level. And that includes talking to our elected officials. If you feel that someone is not necessarily going to understand what you're talking about, or perhaps disagree with certain of your points, of which we all disagree, it's part of being a scientist. Just think about how you connect with an individual, at what level. We all have family members who've suffered some kind of mental illness, neurological disorder, if not directly, but through various family members. That's a point of connection that I think everybody will begin to appreciate. And as I said before, I think it's really important that you talk to people who you are pretty sure are going to disagree with you. It's important, incredibly important. So there are just a few additional points.
If it's okay if I chime in as well, I think
sure.
really, showing up is so critical, just as Dr. Lipscomb said. And, both AAN and SFN have ways to do this. So Max previously put in the chat the website for the advocacy section of each of our organizations. In the AAN, we have what we have cleverly coined PAWNS, the Political Outreach for Neurologic Support. And that is the easiest way to get involved and to get those action alerts that Dr. Lipscomb referred to. And the SFN, to go to the same SFN advocacy website will get you the same opportunity to join those grassroots groups and to hear when we're all coalescing our voices simultaneously to join in on a big push. And those big pushes are coming. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Dr. Jordan, while I have you on the line, let me pose this question to you. This came up in our preparation for the webinar. It was posted to us, but it's also coming through the open questions, where the concerns are about particular angling the conversation towards specific messaging for legislators who may not be traditionally in support of science funding. And particularly in this political environment, that we're all grappling with, maybe you could share with us some of your kind of approach and also tips and tricks here for our colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Roast. I think there are a couple key things. The beginning is, as Dr. Lipscomb said previously, nothing about neuroscience is partisan. We're not red or green. We're not red or blue. We're here to celebrate neuroscience specifically. And I think that speaking to data is really critical in that. It's hard to combat when we have data about prevalence, when we have data about expenditures, when we have data about personal suffering in a person's district. All of those things are pretty difficult to dispute. Inevitably, you will find a member of Congress that that data does not move. It's not particularly at the top of their list of concerns. And one way that we have long thought about this is really trying to get the longitudinal relationship with the office, but also to look at the bills that member of Congress may have introduced, maybe their pattern of voting. And this becomes easier and easier to understand with searches through the internet now. But undoubtedly, you can identify some of the top causes that your member of Congress may care about. And so let's say that's the military or that's defense. There's very easy lines to draw from neuroscience to military to defense. And so we can frame the beauty of arguing for neuroscience research funding is it actually applies to every walk of life, to every group of potential citizens. And so framing your discussion about your work through the lens of what's important to your member of Congress may be really important. In my own past, I had a member who was particularly worried about mental health. And so we always talked about neuroscience research through that lens in particular, even though that's not my clinical practice. I think those are a couple of the key ways that I would approach that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add that also remember that all politics is local. Go to your local Rotary Club or whatever and give a presentation and explain the whole process to people because they don't know the process. So maybe we should go on to the next question. And this will be for the whole panel again. Can you elaborate on how federal funding supports the broader research ecosystem beyond the principal investigators?
I could take a stab first and others
Sure.
chime in. I can build even upon Dr. Jordan's previous point that I think in neuroscience, in some sense, we're fortunate, or it could be unfortunate, but our research and things affects kind of every aspect of society in some way. And so I think the funding on the research side, these federal programs, there's core facilities that people all over the world use that couldn't be sustained in one institution alone. getting to the ecosystem of biomedical research. Even, the companies count on academia, federal research before they kind of launch their endeavors. And so without that, this biotechnology sphere of the economy wouldn't be present. I think neuroscience research impacts veterans who come back with traumatic brain injury, right? There's so many ways that this research helps society in general and then spreads to different parts of society that I think it's a vast ecosystem that we can tap into and create a story. When I visited people in Congress, even if they don't have similar enthusiasm about research, let's say at first, there's always a story that connects and can be compelling for folks. So I think that ecosystem that this federal funding taps into is large.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. George. And I want to reinforce something you said about biotech and pharma, because you'll hear from the federal government right now or from Congress, oh, why can't industry pick this up? They're not going to pick it up. They rely very, very heavily on what we do at our universities with NIH funding. They're product oriented, but they know how dependent they are on our research funded by the federal government. And it's been a very, very good relationship.
So the NIH and NSF now have fabulous examples of the importance of federally funded research. And just as one example, on their web pages. So I'd encourage everybody to kind of go there. So for example, discoveries arising from NIH funded research contributes over 69 billion to the US GDP each year and supports over 7 million jobs. I think these are really stunning numbers. I think that's incredibly important, certainly at the the national level, but also incredibly important, as we all know, at the state level and city level. Many cities have invested a huge amount of money, in building, the biotech economy within their cities, and that's all fueled by the discoveries that we make through federally funded research. So these things, I think, are it's very data driven. The arguments are incredibly compelling. And we can talk about individuals, but we could also talk about the impact on the economy, which is really huge. So I think that those facts and figures are important. And I know with SfN and probably that's same for a number of societies, including AAN, that we have, for when we go to the Hill and advocate, the staff put together these really fabulous fact sheets for every single state. And so we take those into the offices and leave them. And, and it just goes through the numbers of X number of dollars invested, translates into X number of jobs within a city or within the state. So I think those things are really important to have at hand. And they're relatively straightforward to get through the societies, but also through the NIH and NSF websites.
Yeah, really important point, Dr. Lipscomb.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up from one of the questions we have actually in the live Q&A, and I'll answer first because it's really about what is the potential role that patients can have to effectively advocate in support of AAN. But the way I would frame this question is, how can we engage patients to advocate with the AAN, right? And I would like to also hear from the experts here on the panel on how they may have seen effective examples of patients being the effective advocates on the Hill. And we've seen it both from the state and federal examples on how when patients show up to talk to our Congress people, they listen. These are constituents, and they bring very specific life and lived experiences right into their chambers, right? And so I think AAN has always had this patient-facing arm where we, through our suite of products and services, particularly our Brain and Life magazine and our engagements through podcasts, we like to engage the patients, we like to educate them. But I think we would be stronger as advocates if we were able to engage them in these grassroots advocacy efforts with us as well. And so I think this is where the future is. I would love to hear about SfN's, attempts to engage with patients on different diseases and how we can do it together.
Yeah, so this is a super important point, Dr. Rose. We've started to do it more, but we are largely a basic science society. And so we don't have the access to patients, or for that matter, the clinical expertise to pull this off like you do. So this is an area where I think we really need joint programs, where you have a clinician who treats patients with that disorder, and you have a basic scientist who's working on the basic mechanisms of that disorder, and you have a patient. And those three people make the presentation. I think we are hungry for that kind of thing at SfN.
And that's where we can work together.
Yeah.
I will say, thinking back to Dr. Lipscomb's list of ways to engage, sometimes it's not feasible to take a patient with you to DC, but in those times when your member of Congress is at home, those meetings in home offices are a perfect time to bring a patient and to make sure that you have their voice. The AAN coordinates our advocacy efforts with patient organizations at a patient roundtable as well, to make sure that the patient voice is a central part of what we're doing. AAN meets quarterly with the patient roundtable to ensure that we're bringing all those messages to Capitol Hill and to individual members of Congress's offices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, this is a really important point.
Yeah, and maybe I would just add that, I do think that a number of the smaller disease-focused foundations and a lot of the rare disease foundations do an unbelievably important job in terms of advocating for research. The numbers of sometimes the numbers of people that they're advocating for and raising money for is relatively small, but each individual is so incredibly important, and each family is really fighting for their loved ones. So that they're doing a tremendous job in really pushing for consistent support for basic research, and working with those foundations is also, I think, a really important thing that we need to improve on as societies as well.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. One person asks, how can advocacy be recognized by chairs and institutions? Because it takes time. And another person asks, that states that they've been involved in state legislative efforts, but it takes a lot of time. Is there anybody that can fund this? Let me start with the first one. So there's always, if you're a clinician, you're going to be judged on teaching, your clinical work, and your service. If you're a researcher, you're going to be judged on your research, your teaching, and your service. I would strongly advocate for appointments and promotions committees to broaden that definition of service, to have service be on a local level, a state level, a national level, and that be part of the letter and part of the judgment for your promotions. Now, as far as funding it, that's a tough one. Maybe I can refer to some of my clinical colleagues. I don't know of an organization that funds it.
Yeah, I think for now, and particularly in this environment, this remains to be a challenge, or the challenge of our times. But I will say this shouldn't stop us from doing things and doing things together. I wanted to also, as we're getting close to the closing part of the meeting, I just wanted to highlight a number of questions with regard to how do we work together? How do we work together between the bigger organizations like AAN and SfN? And I will say that, there's not been perhaps a busier time for us to be involved with the same initiatives, to co-sign same letters that go, to Congress, to talk about the same topic. So our voices have been joined in many ways, particularly in the past several months, that I could imagine it would have been, from prior experiences. But I think we still have a lot of work to do. And, there's role for the small and scientific societies for us to join. We work as part of the American Brain Coalition and many others. So definitely join us, definitely room for all of us to work together. And that brings us into the final 5 minutes of the webinar, where I'm going to hand off to Dr. Morrison to close off.
Yeah, so I think this has been great. And many of the closing points I'm going to make have been made through the questions and through the comments of the panel. Federal funding is the backbone of what we do and the backbone of discovery. I'm not sure that the public understands that. When they see something come out of UC Davis or whatever, they think UC Davis funded it. They don't realize that it was largely funded by the federal government. And so that message has to get out there. And our voices matter. It can be frustrating. You can feel like it's just not going anywhere, but it does have an impact, and it does have influence. So not only locally, but also in Congress. You can drive change. I've seen it. I've seen the advocacy from the scientific community drive change in terms of Congress. As you've heard from everybody on the panel, get involved through your professional society. And just to comment on those smaller societies that may not have our infrastructure for advocacy, get in touch with us. We will help you. We have all kinds of material that we can provide for you. And we have to work together. I think this has been wonderful. And we need to expand these liaisons between what is largely a basic science society and what is largely a clinical society, though we both have both. We need to expand these liaisons. We need to approach the public and approach Congress together, because we all know that the foundational science leads to the clinical innovation, but it's really the clinical care that our constituents are most concerned about. So we have to present both to them. And I'll stop there. And I just hope that we can continue this partnership.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I will say that this was a fantastic experience, and it's our first foray into making this kind of a town hall forum webinar, reaching out to members of our society and beyond. But I know that when we get together and we work together, we can get things done just like our founders have done it for the neuroscience in the earlier stages. We know we have the why, right? At the academy we say minds on the mission, so we know what our mission is and why we're doing this. We know how, right? And our experts today demonstrated the very basic foundational principles that we can employ in our advocacy, and we know where we're going. So I think working together we're stronger, and we're going together, toward the, stronger position and having our voices heard on the Hill and beyond. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all of you for participating in the webinar, and we're hoping for more of these events in the future.